moments of eternity of God.
Welcome back, everybody. My name is Colin Salgado. I'm an author and contributor at The Prickly Pear. My thoughts and prayers if you're in LA, because we're seeing... It's interesting. I just thought, as I was preparing for this video, how leftist cities are beginning to literalize destructive metaphors. Have you noticed that? Like going up in flames? It's a metaphor for everything's just falling apart. But what we're seeing in LA is the literalization of that metaphor. Or if you're in San Francisco, maybe it would be going to shit, because if you've been there recently, or if you know people there, you know that they have a major problem with people defecating on their streets. So the point I'm trying to make is, when you say a city is going up in flames, you should hope at the very least they're not actually they're not talking literally. If you say a city is going to shit, you should hope and pray they don't literally mean the city's going to shit. It has a massive defecation problem from their homeless population. And I'm constantly amazed by watching the media. It's almost, I want to say this even though it's graphic in a way, because I think the comparison is deserved. It's almost like watching something dirty, like prostitutes performing sex acts on each other, because they are whores for falsehood. That's what they are. They're whores and sluts for falsehood. They're paid to say something, and they will say anything. Like Brian Stelter at CNN is an example. I call him Helter Stelter, because every time he opens his mouth, he's one of the heavyweights in terms of in terms of stupidity. He's one of the heavyweights. Every time he opens his mouth, it's a storm of stupidity. And he literally said, when you're watching social media and you watch a post, a video, an image displaying the chaos, the violence, the fires, he said, you have to be careful, because these videos could be a few hours old, even though they're purporting to show something current. They could even be a couple of days old. For God's sake, they could be a couple of days old. That's what he said. You have to be careful, because apparently, if your city is burning down and you haven't caught on until after the fact 2 days, the crisis has probably passed. I'm going to call that Stelter's rule. If you see a fire, just wait 2 days to report it, because then it won't be an issue. And that's just one example. I mean, ABC News. I could go on and on, but I don't really want to talk about that, because I think this event presents us with a very good opportunity to reflect on why the left is doubling or tripling or quadrupling down on all of the old tactics, all of the fringe ideologies that lost them the 2024 presidential election. And I suppose a lot of people put it down to Trump derangement syndrome. That's what a lot of pundits are saying. And I suppose, when you look at Gavin Newsom forgot, as he frequently does, that words are supposed to be indications of thought. And he said that this crisis in LA is manufactured. He said that apparently thinking that it was a stinging rebuke to the president's deployment of the National Guard to restore order, completely missing the fact that nobody on the right disagrees with him. The crisis is manufactured. It's just manufactured by people like him and Karen Bass, a literal Marxist-Leninist who led a Cuban communist cell when she was in her 20s. Excellent article on The Federalist about that. We have to consider the question, I think, in light of actually And this will sound odd and maybe even hyperbolic at first, but let's go back to the last major, or the biggest catastrophe, not the last major, but the biggest catastrophe for the Democrat Party in its history, which was losing the Civil War. Because as some of you hopefully know, the Civil War was not really a geographic war in the sense of North versus South per se. It was a political war, and it was a war between the two major political parties, the Republican Party and the Democrat Party. And after the Democrat Party lost, after the South lost, the Democrat Party was not just a ruined political party, but it had lost its culture as well. The culture that, Andrew Breitbart said, politics is downstream of culture, and I think that's true. If you look at the antebellum South, that was the culture from which Democrat Party politics was downstream, and it's in that context that the Democrat Party was a ruined political party. It had lost its culture, its plantation culture. It was being militarily occupied. The South was being militarily occupied by the Union. And the Democrat Party perhaps should have just faded away. It was completely destroyed. It had lost a major war. It had tried to start a new nation called the Confederacy. It had lost everything. And what happened was, beginning really with the leadership of Martin Van Buren, the Democrat Party transformed from the party of the cotton plantation to the party of the urban plantation. And there's been some excellent work by Dinesh D'Souza and others. Just think about it this way. Here's a simple way of thinking about it. How were black slaves controlled on the plantation? Well, lack of education, okay? Widespread and arbitrary violence. And thirdly, fractured families. There were a lot of other factors that we're not going to go into, but think about those three defining features. If you were to describe the inner city today, what would you say? Lack of education, widespread and arbitrary violence, and fractured families. All the features are there of the old plantation. Now, I'm not even claiming that this was by design in a conspiratorial way. I just think that the Democrat Party seamlessly transitioned from the party of the urban plantation, the party of the cotton plantation, to the party of the urban plantation, and it's been using the exact same mechanisms to maintain control of its voting bloc. It has large ethnic voting blocs. Think about 90-something% of black Americans still vote for the Democrat Party after 60 years of betrayal. But what the Democrat Party started focusing on were these, as has been documented, starting from Martin Van Buren's day, were these ethnic blocs. And the Democrat Party relatively quickly assimilated new immigrant classes flooding into America. And some of these immigrant classes became quite powerful. Think about the Irish, the Tammany Hall political machine in New York. I don't want to focus solely on that history. I want to think about it as a kind of a frame for why the Democrat Party isn't changing now. And the reason why is because it hasn't really lost its institutions yet. And if you think about the Democrat Party of the pre-Civil War and the post-Civil War era, the reason why the Democrat Party had to remake itself, it didn't have any choice, was because the main institution that the Democrat Party formed to protect was in fact the institution of slavery. To the point that when the Southern states issued their declarations of war on the Union, they did, some of them at least, framed it as a fight for states' rights. You can read the declarations of war online. They're all pretty short. Just read the declarations of war issued by the Southern states. But even when they're articulating their defense of states' rights, it's in the context of defending the institution of slavery. That's how much the Democrat identity was connected to the institution of slavery. And after the Civil War, of course, that institution was destroyed. Now, the Democrat Party did try to salvage it to an extent through the Jim Crow era, but it had no choice but to remake itself. And so the question of why the Democrat Party isn't trying to shift, even in terms of its appearance, shift towards a more moderate stance on illegal immigration or transgenderism, is because they haven't lost the institutions which mediate their control of the American people. There's no expedient yet. And the people who chide the Democrat Party on losing the last election so badly, I think that they misunderstand the character of the Democrat Party entirely. The Democrat Party is not a populist party. And most of the Democrat politicians, most of the people who fund the Democrat Party actually have a deep contempt for elections, because they have a deep contempt for popular America per se. They have a deep contempt for the average Joe. They have a deep contempt for the idea that they should be held accountable by millions of people who are less educated and less successful than they are. So they have a contempt for elections in the first place. But as a result of this, they have amassed for themselves a coalition of institutions, from media institutions to public health institutions, Hollywood, a large swath of the federal judiciary, almost all of the federal bureaucracy, the bureaucratic agencies. And they agitate for their causes through those institutions. And even when they attempt to make themselves appear as if their causes are popularly supported, think about the riots going on in LA, which are meant to make you think that somehow Donald Trump's immigration agenda is just opposed by millions of people who just were inspired, moved to turn out on the streets and protest for illegal aliens. That's not what happened. These protesters are funded. They're following plans. The people funding and planning and supporting them are funded. It's NGO backed. The NGOs are funded by either the federal government, or at least they used to be, or by the Ford Foundation or the Open Societies Foundation. None of this is grassroots. It's all just a farce. It's just a face. It's just an aesthetic. The Democrat Party agitates through institutions. It doesn't accomplish things through honest populism. Think about, let's do a case study. Transgenderism. Actually, before we get to the specific case study, just think about, let's just take 4 of the central principles of the Democrat Party platform. Open borders, mass immigration, mass amnesty. That's one. This new-fangled transgender issue. That's a second. Unrestricted access to abortion. That's a third. And then you have the broader LGBTQIA+, blah, 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 blah. That's a fourth. Out of these 4 reasons for existence, which of them precisely has been accomplished through honest populism? Abortion? There is a large number of people who support abortion now, but only after decades of institutional coercion and indoctrination. At the time that Roe v. Wade became the law of the land, 44 states had restrictions on abortions. The Democrat Party did not accomplish their triumph for abortion rights through honest populism. They did it through a small number of corrupt judges who took it upon themselves. I call that court the Mount Sinai court. The court has Mount Sinai moments where they hand down these moral judgments from on high. Yeah, unborn children, they're not human beings anymore. The court has determined that. Abortion. But the point is, it was accomplished through an elite institution, not through honest populism, not through popular support, not through grassroots agitation. Similarly, with open borders, the Biden administration relied on a network of NGOs to process and move 10 million illegal aliens into the interior of the United States. This was not supported by the people of America. The people of America did not give their blessing to a de facto absolution of their borders. That's not what happened. Joe Biden bypassed the will of the American people. He turned his back on the will of the American people, relying instead on federally funded leftist NGO institutions to perpetrate his immigration policy. Those same NGOs, some of them, who are now agitating in the streets of LA, trying to kill cops, blowing up cars, pretending that they're grassroots. Let's do our case study, transgenderism. When we look at how transgenderism has suddenly become a widespread pathology among young women, when we look at how it's become a mainstay of the LGBTQIA plus rights movement, when we look at how it's supported by corporations, all of that, think about how this happened. It wasn't just Hollywood making transgender parable movies like Amelia Perez and then giving that the Oscar. It wasn't just Hollywood moguls celebrating the transing or the androgenizing of their children. It was that in tandem with public health institutions, major medical organizations, including the ones entrusted with pediatric health, giving their blessing, writing scientific papers, releasing guidance, accrediting mutilation, castration, gross hormonal manipulation of young bodies as necessary and appropriate gender-affirming care. While that was going on, you had political aristocrats like the Pritzker women, who are all billionaires, Mackenzie Scott, the ex-wife, I think that's her name, of Jeff Bezos, donating millions or hundreds of millions to transgender advocacy groups or university medical departments like Yale University or the University of California at San Diego. It was institutions like the Seattle Children's Hospital, which has a famous program for gender-affirming care for children. It was all of that as a coalition. It was the social media algorithms pandering content to young girls, specifically to make them pathologically anxious about their bodies. They didn't go through you. They didn't go through parents. They went through institutions. That's how they did it. They bypassed the will of the people. They bypassed the opinion of parents. They made their argument through images, through court decisions, through prestigious medical journals. They made their argument. They imposed their will through all the channels you have no control over. They don't care about honest populism. So when next time you criticize the Democrat Party for not caring enough that they lost the election, just remind yourself, losing elections is not an insurmountable obstacle to them. Think about what's going on in the courts right now. They lost the House, they lost the Senate, they lost the presidency, and yet they've managed to put the majority of Donald Trump's agenda on hold through 3 or 4 district courts in San Francisco or Massachusetts or Maryland. They don't need to win elections to perpetrate their fraud, to implement their evil. They don't need to win elections. So the question is, why haven't they changed? Well, you have to remember that all of these institutions, this coalition, this quote-unquote, to borrow a phrase from the Mission Impossible universe, the entity, that's what I sometimes refer to them as, the entity. The entity is made up of all these elite institutions, meant to completely bypass the will of the people, meant to insulate these radical and perverse agendas like transgenderism. The purpose of these institutions is to insulate that agenda from popular accountability. The purpose of those institutions is to insulate this agenda from being slowed down by parents with a conscience. But that entity is not controlled by one person or even a group of people. It's controlled by an ideology. Just like the Communist Party of China, the CCP, it's not really controlled by one man. It's controlled by an ideology. If you don't serve the ideology, they get rid of you. In other words, to moderatize, I don't even know if that's a word, to moderatize, as the critics of the Democrat Party are suggesting, would threaten to fracture the entire leftist coalition, make it ideologically incoherent. Even if the Democrat Party were to steer towards the center, would so many of the institutions which are part of the entity, which are essential to Democrat Party success, would those institutions follow suit? I don't think so. The Democrat Party has to stay fringe because that is the ideology which holds the entire anthill of alliances together. You know. So I'm hopeful, of course, that we're going to see a real and radical change in America under Trump. But I think we should be careful. The creation of images, narratives, regulations, moral norms still lies in large part with leftist institutions, with the entity. You know, anyone who deceives himself into believing that the bureaucracy just cannot survive 4 years of onslaught, those people are fools and ignoramuses. The bureaucracy plans to mitigate Trump and sit him out. You know, they plan to rage against the dawning of the light. You know, they plan to ignite a fire in your home, even if not in your heart. And they plan to burn down your city to pass the time. It's very, very sad that we can say these things about our own cities. But if there is a difference between hell and LA, it is not fire and hatred. And I'll leave you with that. Thank you for watching.